Welcome to this explainer. Man, I am so incredibly excited for this one. Today, we're diving into two absolute heavyweight cognitive frameworks that honestly might just cure that daily burnout we all feel: deep work and flow. Let's uncover a completely new lens on how to approach your workday.
But right off the bat, I want you to just think about your average week. Why are we always so incredibly distracted? Despite being constantly busy, firing off messages left and right, running from one meeting to the next, so many of us get to Friday feeling like we haven't actually produced anything of real, lasting value. So what is going on here?
Okay, let's dive into this because the data is actually staggering. A 2012 McKinsey study cracked open exactly where our time is going, and they found that the average knowledge worker spends over 60% of their work week just engaging in electronic communication and internet searching. Let that sink in. With close to 30% of our time dedicated just to reading and answering email alone, our attention is literally being fragmented into tiny, useless slivers.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the distraction epidemic. Then, what is deep work? After that, the state of flow. Then we'll put them head to head with deep work versus flow. And finally, cultivating ultimate focus.
All right, part one, the distraction epidemic, the modern crisis.
Driven by tools like email, text messages, and that whole shiny tangle of infotainment sites, we really can't accommodate long periods of uninterrupted thinking anymore. So we replace it with what author Newport calls shallow work. These are those non-cognitively demanding, logistical-style tasks that we usually do while half distracted, and frankly, they don't create much new value. We're constantly acting like human network routers, interrupting ourselves for quick hits of distraction. And here's the truly terrifying part. If you spend enough time in this frenetic state, you permanently chip away at your brain's capacity to actually concentrate.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the science behind why all this bouncing around is so destructive. Business professor Dr. Sophie Leroy researched what happens when you switch from task A to task B. And it turns out, your attention doesn't immediately follow you. Instead, a thick attention residue remains stuck thinking about that original task. Honestly, even just taking a quick glance at your inbox leaves this residue behind. And it severely dampens your peak performance. It's like trying to run a sprint with weights on your ankles.
Moving on to part two, what is deep work? A strategy for survival.
So, how do we actually fight back? Well, we turn to Cal Newport's deep work. Newport introduces something he calls the deep work hypothesis. He argues that the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at the exact same time that it's becoming incredibly valuable in our information economy. Essentially, those who cultivate this skill are going to absolutely thrive, while those who just wallow in the shallows are going to be left behind.
And here's the formal definition. Deep work consists of professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. Notice how intentional this is, right? It's a strenuous action. It's a deliberate strategy designed to wring every single drop of potential from your brain. It creates new value, it improves your skill, and it is incredibly hard for anyone else to replicate.
To understand what this looks like in the real world, let's look at the legendary psychiatrist Carl Jung. Back in 1922, Jung needed to produce some serious breakthrough ideas to outwit his former mentor, Sigmund Freud. And he knew he couldn't do that in his hectic Zurich clinic. So, what did he do? He literally built a 2-story stone tower in the woods of Bollingen. He would lock himself in his private office every single morning for 2 hours of completely undistracted writing. This perfectly illustrates the bimodal philosophy of deep work, basically dividing your time and dedicating these extreme, isolated, almost monastic stretches to deep pursuits so you can reach maximum cognitive intensity. All right, shifting gears to part 3, the state of flow, optimal experience.
While deep work focuses really heavily on professional output, there's another side of this focus equation, and that is a profound internal psychological state discovered by psychologist Csikszentmihalyi. He defines flow as an optimal experience where attention is freely invested to achieve goals, with no disorder to straighten out and no threat for the self to defend against. He actually calls it psychic negentropy, which is just a fancy way of saying a state of complete order and harmony in your mind. In normal everyday life, we constantly interrupt ourselves with doubts and questions. But in a flow state, consciousness just works smoothly, and action follows action seamlessly, almost as if by magic.
Just listen to how a ballet dancer describes this state. I feel enormous power to affect something of grace and beauty. Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. Another subject, a chess player, noted they felt they were in complete control of their world. And this highlights the deeply emotional, intrinsic reward of flow.
It's not just about producing a widget on an assembly line. It's about this transcendent feeling of being in absolute top form. So the crucial point is that this magical optimal experience doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It requires very specific environmental and internal conditions. To actually access flow, you must be engaged in an activity with clear goals to strive for, a rule-bound action system, and immediate feedback. And honestly, most importantly, the challenges of the task must be perfectly matched to your existing skills. If it's too hard, you get anxious. If it's too easy, you get bored. Flow lives right in that golden sweet spot right in the middle.
Now for part 4. Deep work versus flow, a nuanced comparison.
And this brilliantly illustrates where people often get confused. A lot of folks conflate these two terms, but they really are different. Deep work is a pragmatic action. It's a habit. It's hyper-focused on creating economic value and really honing complex skills. And because it pushes you to your absolute limit, it usually involves strenuous mental strain. Frankly, it's exhausting, and you can rarely do it for more than 4 hours a day. On the flip side, flow is an internal psychological state. It focuses on enjoyment and that optimal experience. So while it definitely requires disciplined mental activity to set up, the feeling itself is effortless, seamless, and deeply intrinsically rewarding.
Finally, Part 5. Cultivating ultimate focus.
Ultimately, these really aren't competing frameworks at all. They are deeply complementary. Mastering the grueling strategy of deep work actually facilitates the conditions you need for a joyful life of flow. A major key here, and I found this totally fascinating, is developing what's called the autotelic personality. This is someone who learns to make choices by setting clear, lifelong and daily goals. They become completely unself-consciously involved in their interests, they easily set aside their defenses and all those mundane distractions, and they view even everyday tasks as complex opportunities. Essentially, the autotelic self actively structures their own consciousness to transform potentially boring, entropic experiences right into a flow state.
Let's move on and see how this builds into an actionable playbook for you. Step 1. You really have to quit or at least severely limit social media and infotainment to tame that shallow work footprint. Your willpower is limited, and you just have to take back control of your attention. Step 2. Choose a depth philosophy to schedule your focus. Maybe that's Jung's extreme bimodal isolation, or maybe it's a more flexible journalistic approach where you squeeze it in where you can. Step 3. Inside those distraction-free blocks, match your absolute deepest skills to the hardest challenges possible. By doing this, you're literally using Newport's structure to ignite Csikszentmihalyi's flow.
So what does this all mean for us? I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. As you look at your calendar for tomorrow, ask yourself, are you managing your time just to produce economic value, or are you managing your consciousness to find optimal meaning? By combining the disciplined schedule of deep work with the internal mastery of flow, you can completely redesign not just your workday, but the very quality of your entire life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I truly hope you find your focus.